think one of my favorite things about God is knowing that God can use anyone. It's a really amazing thing to understand that God can take anyone and use them in order to serve him and be a part of building his kingdom. And so that's kind of the neat thing about God is he oftentimes picks like the least expected people. In the New Testament book of Acts, Jesus has come, he's died on the cross, he's been resurrected, he's spoken to the disciples after the resurrection, and he's ascended into heaven. And the disciples are together and they're like, okay, we've only got 11 of us. Judas had hung himself, and they said Jesus had 12. We want to get this ship going like Jesus had it going. He had 12. We got to have 12. So we need a replacement for Judas. And so they said, all right, we have some requirements. They said we need somebody who was with Jesus from the beginning. So for like all 3 years of Jesus' public ministry. And they kicked around some different names and some of their requirements, and they ended up with 2 guys. And they said, all right, God, we got it narrowed down to 2. And then they prayed, and they cast lots, and the lot fell to a guy named Matthias. And Matthias, in their mind, became the 12th apostle. That's who they picked. But God had somebody else in mind, somebody that would have never entered into their brains. In fact, it was the last person on earth they would have ever even considered. Met none of their requirements whatsoever. It was a guy named Saul of Tarsus. Saul would later be known as Paul, the Apostle Paul, the one who wrote so many of the New Testament letters and was so instrumental and used by God to building the church. I mean, this was a guy that nobody would have picked. I mean, even Saul himself, Paul, he referred to himself as the chief of sinners. He's like, I was the worst of the worst. And he wasn't using hyperbole or exaggerating. He really was. Like, his job was to stop Jesus. His job was to persecute the church and arrest Christians. And yet, this was who God picked. So listen, I don't know who you think you are, that God wouldn't pick you or choose you or use you. Are you kidding me? God's in the business of picking the last people on earth to share his love with others. Even in the Old Testament, I mean, this was nothing new for God. He chose a guy named Moses to lead his people out of Egypt. Who's picking Moses? I mean, this guy was a wanted murderer. He's on the run for his life. He's fled Egypt. He's old when God calls him. I mean, he's like 83 years old when he goes back to Egypt. I mean, he's already getting pretty up there in age. He's got a speech impediment, and yet he's the one who's supposed to tell everybody and be the mouthpiece of God and speak, and he doesn't even speak well. I mean, this guy is not like necessarily who you would pick. The Egyptians don't like him because he had murdered an Egyptian, and he's wanted for murder there. And the Israelites don't like him because he grew up in Pharaoh's household and wasn't really one of them, and so he's despised by them. And yet God says, no, you're going to be the one who will be my mouthpiece and will lead these people out. And so listen, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you've done. I don't know what's been done to you. But I know there's probably part of you that says, well, God's not going to pick me. God's not going to use me because of A, B, C, D, all the way to Z. Come on. You're exactly who God's calling. You're exactly who God is picking. And don't you for 1 second allow your deficiencies to determine your calling. Let God determine your calling. If he lays it on your heart to share his love with someone, then you be that someone who shares God's love. Don't let the moment pass. Take advantage of it. God will use you, and he does call you, and he's got a plan for you. So let's go for it.